we'll be starting at 5 minutes after the hour. Good evening, everyone. We'll be getting started in about 5 minutes. We will start 5 minutes after the hour. Good evening. We'll get started in 1 minute. We'll be starting in 1 minute. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Masonic Seminar Series. My name is Brother Katie Kumsie, and I am a member of Universal Co-Masonry, which is the Masonic organization for men and women that supports this group. I want to welcome everyone who is returning, as well as those who are new, as well as those who are coming in from the various platforms that we're streaming on. So welcome to everybody, and also to our Philippine crew that is coming in the early morning of Tuesday. So welcome, everyone. I'm coming in from our headquarters here in Colorado, where it's nice and snowy, so I have something nice and warm to keep me through the next hour and a half. I hope that you are comfortable as we start to discuss the art of Freemasonry. I'm always excited to talk about Freemasonry. You never have to give me an excuse to do it, but I am particularly excited to talk about this portion or this aspect, this characteristic of Freemasonry, because it is more abstract than some of the things that we talk about. Last month, we just had a Q&A where you could ask any question you wanted, and that took us quite nicely to the end of the hour and a half. A little bit about the Masonic Seminar for those who are joining us for the first time. The Masonic Seminar series was put on and created by Universal Co-Masonry to help build out a knowledge of Freemasonry in general and Universal Co-Masonry in particular. So the aspects that I'm bringing up are from my own study. They are from my own perspective. And so if you were to ask another Mason, you might get a different answer. You might get something similar. It just depends. I have in the studio with me Brother Patrick Alessandra and Brother Benjamin Hartle, who are assisting me with the various platforms and Zoom and all that good stuff so that we can make it a nice, smooth lecture for the next hour and a half. A little bit of housekeeping rules. Please keep your hand not raised until I open it up for questions, which, unlike our Masonic Philosophical Society, we don't have a large discussion point, but I will stop periodically just to kind of break it up, let your mind rest a little bit as we answer some questions related to the topic that we're on, and then we could pick back up. So that's a little bit of the do's and don'ts, and please make sure your questions are on topic, because that always helps. And nothing's worse than a question that comes out of left field and kind of ruins the flow of everything. I also have Brother Patrick here. He's going to help bring in questions from those streaming on X and Facebook and the likes. So you'll hear him coming in and chiming in. You also have Brother Benjamin, who's doing Zoom. So if you have questions, you can send it to him. It's kind of hard for me to divert questions that are direct to me, just because I'm trying to hold the audience here for everyone. So talk to Brother Benjamin Hartle on Zoom, and Brother Patrick Alessandra will give you a voice on our various platforms. All right, so let's get to the heart of our topic, which is the art of Freemasonry. This particular presentation is, they're episodic, meaning that each month it's a different presentation. The topic is something that you'll find on our website. I believe it's even this month is scheduled. I'd like to go out of sequence to keep you on your toes. And it's the art of Freemasonry, but it is a compilation of a couple different presentations that I've done over the years. Because the one thing I want to say about Freemasonry in general is that it's dynamic, it's living, it's organic. It's not something that is static and has boundaries that you can find. And what I mean by that is if you're not continually pushing yourself to learn about Freemasonry, then you're not doing your job as a Mason, because there's just so much that it encompasses, and it gets into every fabric of your life. It's ubiquitous. There's no edge, as I said. And so throughout my time as a Mason with Universal Co-Masonry, I have upgraded the way that I have thought and the way that I think, and what I've come to understand through the various things that I've been talking about and been studying. So this is a compilation. You might see, for those who are with us with previous presentations on the art of Freemasonry, you might see some elements that look similar, but hopefully you'll find something a little bit new. All right, so when we look at this, first we want to define it. I'm defining art, not Freemasonry. And even if you disagree with my definition, I ask that you just kind of accept it for the next hour and a half. And then you can send me an email and tell me what you would prefer the definition to be if you so desire. But that way we just have a common ground that we can kind of springboard off and have a discussion. So the definition of art is something that is created with imagination and skill, and that is beautiful or that expresses important ideas or feelings. Now, I am going to make the assertion that although beauty is in the eye of the beholder, there are tolerances of which all humanity falls under. That if you go beyond that level or that boundary, it's no longer beautiful. Is that tangible? No. Can I tell you what metric it's done by? No. But I can tell you that it exists. So when we look at something that is beautiful, it can be tragically beautiful. It can be fearfully beautiful. There can be adjectives in front of it, but it's beautiful nonetheless. But the most important part is that it expresses ideas and feelings through skill. I often quip about hotel art. I don't understand it. To me, I'm not an artist, and I'm like, I could do better than that. But I don't think that's the point. And that's maybe another topic for another day, but it should have skill to it. It should have some important idea behind it. The etymology of art, which etymology means origin, like where did the word come from? It's related to the Latin word ars, meaning art, skill, or craft. Another word could be technique. It's the first known use of the word comes about 1200 AD in some manuscripts. So it's fairly new on the word landscape, but art comes in various different forms. Whether the word was provided or not, art has always been. In fact, I often give the challenge, can you give me a culture or a society where there was no form of art? So that means painting, sculpture, literature, architecture, music, acting, any of those things. Can you find me a culture or society in written history that doesn't have these things? My bet is that you probably cannot, because it is just inherent to who we are as human beings, to have some form of expression. And there's many different mediums in which we can do this. So here's a quote by Henry Ward Beecher. Every artist dips his brush in his own soul and paints his own nature into his pictures. Now, at first, you're going to kind of wonder, like, are we talking about Freemasonry at all, or is it just going to be about art? I want to lay the backdrop of art first before we delve into Freemasonry, because it does take a little bit of setup. I absolutely love this particular quote, because when I look at art, no matter what style, what medium that you're moving through to express this idea, to put your skill to task, I always like to think it comes from some place, and that place being the soul. And the soul being something that is intrinsic to every human being, but I don't know if it's individualistic or not. That's a discussion for another time as well. But it is something that has a touch of the ego in it. And when I use the word ego, oftentimes in occult circles, ego is frowned upon as a word. And I don't mean that in the negative. I mean it as a sense of identification. What makes me, me, and your art, and what separates us. So this idea of dipping the brush into our soul and painting on the canvas of our life is something I find to be very poetic. And perhaps poetry is one of my favorite mediums of art, in addition to sculpture and dance. And maybe that's why it speaks to me so much. Another quote, the artist must create a spark before he can make a fire. And before art is born, the artist must be ready to be consumed by the fire of his own creation. It is an interesting thing when we think of the art of Freemasonry to wonder what it is that we are creating. What is it that we are trying to express, to put across? And are we ready to be consumed by our own creation? Is it the fire that burns the phoenix? That fire, is that something that we've created, or is it something external? And I don't think it is external. It can be at times, it can have assistance, but we have to have that spark of creativity and then be ready for it to become itself. And that's really what I think it means. Not only that we'll be consumed by our own creation, but that the creation becomes its own entity. William Blake is one of my favorite artists. And he says, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. So what do these quotes have to do with art? And what is it that we are trying to do in Freemasonry? It ultimately comes down to a two-letter phrase, thought form. We are talking about thought forms. To define it, and you can read this quote if you'd like, I'm not going to read it to you. A thought form is exactly what it sounds like. It is energy that creates content or creates some type of matter. And when I say matter, I'm not necessarily saying, I'm picturing money and therefore I'm creating this thought, which will actually give me money, like tangible money in my hand. It's a little too literal. Thought form is something different. And in order to talk about the thought form, I need to talk about the word egregore. And Brother Benjamin, if you could throw the word egregore into the chat, just so people who have not heard it or may not be familiar with it can kind of get a visual of the word. Egregore is an extremely important word in the occult. The egregore is a repository of thought forms, and there are different egregores. So you can say there's the egregore of Freemasonry, but there's a lot of different types of Freemasonry. There's, charitable that does philanthropy and, builds hospitals and takes care of the sick and does, pancake breakfasts and stuff like that. There's that egregore. There's the egregore of civil reform, looking at society and saying, how can we make it better? And the one that Universal Co-Masonry certainly stands more upon than the other two is the egregore of spiritual evolution, of not only purifying our present level of consciousness, but intensifying it so much so that it reaches a new level of consciousness. And the image that comes into my mind, and forgive the science analogy, but I can't help myself. But in order to get an electron to move from its lowest level, which is called ground state, it has to have enough energy to go to the next level up. So if you look at an atom, kind of like Saturn with the rings, you can look at it that way. The atom in the middle, you have protons and neutrons, which make up the entity as itself, like what's helium and hydrogen. And then you have states of energy that go out, kind of like, again, like the rings of Saturn. But in order to move out in those rings, you have to have level energy requirements. In order to level up, you have to get the energy to move out into that space. And it requires more and more the further and further you go. And Freemasonry, Universal Co-Masonry, is looking at scrubbing clean the consciousness that we have, and that is through the purification of our senses. It's really hard to paint reality if you cannot see reality what it is, if you're a realist. If you're a surrealist, which I love surrealism, art beyond all imagination, you have to understand what reality is so that you can break the mold in order to paint beyond that, to blend multiple realities. One artist, Vladimir Kush, who does surrealism, an amazing job of taking different realities, and emerging them into something that's beyond. And so in order to do those things, we have to have our senses have to be clean and bright. They have to be able to see reality to the best of our ability. Even if we all had perfect senses, we would still see things differently because our experience shades that. And I think that goes back to the quote, a beacher, where you are dipping your brush into your soul. You're dipping your fresh into your perspective, but you have to make sure that you know what it is that you're looking at before you can paint the perspective of that. So Universal Co-Masonry looks at spiritual evolution and is trying to help purify and elevate higher consciousness to create a different egregore than perhaps the other two, civic reform and philanthropy that I mentioned. But ultimately, those three egregores build up a bigger repository, which is going to be Freemasonry. Now, a thought form. Right now, we're all thinking, I hope, about art and Freemasonry. And even though we're far apart, we're all generating thoughts about that. And that's the beginning of a thought form. And when we start putting more and more energy into it, we can move that thought into a form. We can give it more substance, more texture, more consistency to it. So, and this works both for the positive and the negative. When we look at the negative, you can say that, if I'm thinking negative thoughts about something, that blends into the egregore of whatever that thing is. So thought forms they're not a tool, they're a conduit. They're a conduit for your energy, wherever you're putting it. So if you had a bad day today, which I am sorry to hear that happened, and all you can do is ruminate over your bad day, you are reinvigorating the negative energy of that egregore of the day, of that thought form. So you are adding to the repository of it. Likewise, if you're like, I had a bad day, but I'm going to focus on having a good rest of my evening, and I'm going to do it this way, and you can start thinking about the positive stuff of the day, you're adding to that same egregore. It's just in a positive method, in a positive fashion. So thought forms, if we were to take it to art, every artist they're literally the living embodiment of thought forms. They're literally taking their thoughts and putting it into form, whether it's through a play, whether it's through the composition of music, whether it's writing poetry or, or wood carving or welding or whatever it is that they're doing. They're literally taking their thoughts and they're pushing it into creation. Now, the blending of this is the technique and the skill. Art means technique, and no one can be an artist without technique. And I think there'd be some people who would argue with me. They might look at their child's art and say it's beautiful and it's just scribbles on a paper. It's not necessarily art. It's just the attachment to the kid more than it is to their skill or the lack of. So there's something objective in art, and that's the skill. So when artists, they're using their skill, they're pushing that thought, that energy that's coming out of their soul, and they're actualizing it into whatever type of art they're doing. When we look at thought forms, they're not just your thoughts create your world, which I think modern times have really kind of wiped that saying kind of flat, has kind of made it anemic from meaning, because thoughts do create your world, but I think it's more than what we go to in modern times. So when we look at it, there's what creates a thought form. So quality. It's interesting to think that right now, if I were to ask you to close your eyes and think about anything you want, not necessarily what we're talking about, like just close your eyes, think about what you want. Now tell me what color it is. If you had a bad day, I probably bet your color would be a little bit darker. If you had the best day of your life, I bet it's a lot brighter. But it determines the color. So what color is it? Is outside it's snowing here in Colorado. And so, to me, when I think of my day, I think of blue, probably more of a whitish blue because it's cold and it's winter, and that's the colors of my thought. When we look at the nature of your form, so again, go back to whatever it was you're thinking of. Now think of what is the form? To me, when I think of what I was thinking about winter and a snowy day, it's a whitish blue. It's, the form is kind of hard to describe, and maybe you're having the same experience. The form is, it's not a snowflake. It's not so literal to be a snowflake, but I would say that it's fluffy, that it has kind of opaque edging. Like you can't really see where it begins, or where it ends, but it definitely has a color. So, or it has a form rather. So the next one is definiteness, the clarity of thought of its outline. So when I was talking about how it has kind of an opaque energy or opaque boundary on my particular thought form of the day, I was talking about the definiteness of that thought form. Sometimes, like if you had a really bad experience or a really good experience, it's very structured. Like if you think to the best memory you ever had, it has a definite boundary. So when we look at creation, we look at thought forms. This is the art that every one of us has the capability of. And it takes more and more practice to get better and better at it. So when I first, a little bit to give some context to this, but when I first came into the understanding of thought forms, you can get the book by Annie Besant. It's called Thought Forms. You can get it anywhere, I believe online, Amazon. Do we have it through the Masonic Publishing Company?
I believe we do have it on the
Yeah,
Masonic Exchange.
yeah.
Let me get that link.
Yes, we have it in the Masonic Exchange if you want to buy it there. Amazon has it. But thought forms, it's not a big book, but when I first came into the understanding of thought forms, it was kind of hard for someone to ask me, well, what are you thinking, and to articulate it. Oftentimes, the energy that we create just sits as thoughts. But an individual who is very mindful of what their thoughts create are very good at understanding how to get their thoughts into thought forms, how to actualize, because there is a difference between thoughts and thought forms. So if I'm just, someone asks me, what are you thinking? And my mind's just kind of going all over the place. That's just that's just a thought. That's not a thought form. But when I think about, what do I believe in? I was thinking about this the other day. If I had to put in words, if someone came up to me and said, what do you believe in? What would I say? And how would I say it? And that was taking my thoughts and moving it into a thought form. Because over the last 40 years of my life, I've had a lot of change in the way that I believe, and things that were once I held stock in, maybe not so much, maybe even more so. And, how to categorize and kind of organize my thoughts. The Freemason is trying to take their thoughts, create thought forms, and ultimately have controlled thoughts in a sense that helps elevate their consciousness. So if someone's asking you how you feel right now, and you start to talk about, the boundary of it and the form of it, is it a square? Is it nebulous? Is it this or that? And, if I ask you to put a color to it, that's you taking control of your thoughts and not just letting them meander. An uncontrolled mind I want to say it's a very dangerous. I think it's easy to kind of fear monger with that. But I think the uncontrolled mind is a waste of energy. It's a waste of potential. It's like throwing electrons all over the place and not giving them any home to sit in. So when we look at the thought form, Freemasonry is teaching us how to create our thoughts, how to move them into one form over the other. Now, on the right side of your screen, and I keep looking off a little bit to my right because that's where my computer is, so forgive me for not looking at you. But if you look at the right side of your screen, there are layers to our bodies. Now, some people say there's 3 layers, some people say there's 7, some people do more or less, some people say there's just 1. Oftentimes just 2. You have the body and the soul. I'm going to contend that there are 7, that there are 7 layers to us. For those who are familiar with the principle of emanations, it's much like that, where you have the divine spark sitting at the core, wherever the core of our body is, sitting at the very, very middle of our body, the very essence of us. And from that, the divine spark is going to work through various mediums to create different bodies of man. Now, New Age would say it's an aura. I would say that's kind of a kindergarten explanation to it. Not that it's wrong, it's just, I think, very basic. But when we look at this, you have the physical body, the astral body, and the mental body, and there's different names depending on where you're pulling your sources from. So feel free to explore it. But the reason why I bring up the layers of the body, of the human form, I should say, is because thought forms come out of these different layers. It's not that it's just coming from the physical body. It can. I mean, if you really strengthen your physical body, then the thought forms are really going to be around the physical body. But if you are one that works on purifying and cleansing and being aware of the other layers to you, the thought forms can derive out of this, out of the different bodies. So the causal body, the mental body, the astral body. There are different, again, different words. But think about it for a second. For some of you guys, this might be like, yeah, I've already heard this before. For some of us, it's like, I've never heard this in my life. If I were to ask you to go back to the thought that I asked, like, what were you thinking? Mine was about the day in the snow. Where was that coming from? What layer within me? Was it the physical body? I didn't really talk about being cold, more about the beauty of the day. So maybe it's not necessarily my physical, maybe it is. But could you go into your thought and see what layer it could possibly have come from? Keep in mind that the Atma is the highest of them all, and that's some could say the divine spark. I've heard it called the divine self. There's a lot of different names. Did your thought come from that? Mine did not. I would tell you it didn't because I was talking about weather and comfort and whatnot. But when I ask you, what is it that you believe in? Like genuinely believe in? Is that coming from the mental body or is that coming from the higher body, the higher self? Hopefully, I mean, at some point, like with the mental isn't just your brain. The mental is thought forms, is again that thought. It's where thoughts are created. So are you dipping your brush into your higher self and pulling it through the mental and coming out? Or are you just keeping it very superficial and just dealing with the bodies that are closest to the physical form? Where did your thoughts come from? Because that's really, really important. As a Freemason, and in about 2 minutes here, I'm gonna stop and open the floor for comments and questions. As a Freemason, I'm going to talk about in the latter half of our discussion here about how it is that Freemasonry helps us with thought forms. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is to be aware of all the levels of our body, if we can do that, and to control our thoughts and how they're created and then channel them into thought forms. That is a big task. Recently, I was talking to a brother, and he had brought up how Wagner, he used to have a bunch of people over. He was he entertained a lot. I can imagine being Wagner, and he only would invite people that would talk about things of substance. And I thought a lot about that since having that conversation, because if they just talked about the superficial, like the weather, they weren't invited back. It was kind of a one-shot deal. And I wonder how much of our conversation is used to go deeper than just the superficial in a day. Someone's going to argue with me that you need to have some superficial discussion, and I don't know if that's necessarily true, but it's an idea. How is it that our thoughts can help create something stronger, go into that receptacle, that egregore? What are we feeding into all day long? And that's my question for you, and maybe a rhetorical question before I open the floor, is if you were to look back at the last couple days, what egregores are you feeding with your thoughts? Are they constructive, your thoughts, or are they deconstructive? Are they destructive? Where are you putting all your energy? Is a simple way of saying that. That's a rhetorical question. I am going to stop the presentation. I'm going to open up the floor for comments and questions. I don't know, Brother Patrick, if there is any up yet. Okay. So the floor is open for any questions or comments about thought forms and about art in general. Because I'm pretty sure some of you guys were like, this is not where I thought we were going to go. Amy, it is very good to see you. We'll unmute you and the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's good to be back. It's been a bit. Thank you. It's good to see you. Thanks for having me. So to keep this short, it really reminds me of a discipline that I've been using for myself with Gestalt psychology, which focuses on being present in the moment. I used to hold a lot of like past narratives and experiences. And over a cup of tea, I would spend time just knocking that out and deconstructing myself. In Freemasonry, you'll see the thing with the rough edges, the other side, it's smoother. I think that also kind of captures the chipping away the rough edges and refining yourself to build a better self. And I just really love where this is going already, because yeah, power without strength has no direction and technique, which you do need to better yourself. And I mean, I never saw the Atma as red. I think if I'm reading this correctly, I saw it as like white, just like straight up pure white. So it's like playing around with this new structure here to continue to, like, for me, I've spent so many years just like bettering myself. If I catch myself taking something personally, or I catch myself attaching onto something that's going to go into my brain that I don't need, I'll just be like, up, 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 stop it, ground into your body, use your mindfulness tools, and it stops. And it's so important because you have to disconnect. You have to let go of your sense of self and your structure, which takes discipline. Am I the best at it? No. Sometimes it still happens. But I've gotten so much better at directing myself and using Gestalt psychology, which is kind of similar to what you're talking about. So moving forward, I will definitely play around with this colors and read the book. And I just wanted to say thank you because this will be so exciting and fun to play around with.
Thank you, Amy. Brother Sandy. Hold on one second. Brother Benjamin's going to unmute you. I lowered her hand on you. Sorry. Did you?
I asked her to unmute.
Brother Sandy, go ahead and unmute yourself. You should have. There you go. There you go. The floor is yours, Brother Sandy.
So I love what you said about Wagner, inviting people who only spoke on deeper levels. But it's very difficult to find that in today's society. In the Masonic Philosophical Society meetings, which I've been a part of for many years and all around the country and all around the world, actually, that's one of the first things newcomers come up and say to me is, I can't have these conversations with my family. I can't have them with my coworkers. My friends don't speak this way. They're so happy to have found us. So it's not so easy to find people who do speak on a deeper level. So everyone on this seminar, I'm so glad you found it because this provides probably what you've been looking for. And the second thing I'd like to say is, you brought up that one quote about the artist who dips his paintbrush in his soul. I think another thing in society that I have found, and others that I've spoken to have found, is no one has a philosophy of life anymore. So no one knows what the soul is because it's not an all-encompassing philosophy of how the world was created, what we're doing here, what does the soul mean, what's the spirit? And that's what Freemasonry can provide you with, because Freemasonry is a philosophy that encompasses all of that. So when the artist dips his brush in his soul, that can mean 1,000 things to 1,000 different people, because we don't have one philosophy of life anymore. Certain cultures do, of course, but I think we've lost that. And that to me is how you do access those fine paintings, is through your soul. But what is the soul? Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Sandy. And before we get to Billy, I'm going to make a couple comments because I think you brought up some really great points. To your first point about having the conversations, I too have also heard, maybe standing by your side when people have said, I can't do this anywhere else. I think that throughout my time, like part of the what's the word I want to use? It's not training, maybe it is training, but part of the experience of being a Freemason is to help create those spaces for people to have conversations. Even if it's, sometimes I'm interviewing someone who wants to be a Mason, and I always ask them the question that every person dreads is, so how do you think, the political landscape of the United States is going, or whatever country they're coming from? And everyone kind of backs off. And ultimately my job is to disarm and to create that space and say, well, instead of telling me whether you do or do not like a certain person, why don't you tell me about like what you think is the best way to go about it? And so we have to create that space for people to have those conversations, because they're not going to create it for us. more than likely, because there's a little bit of courage in going in and saying, so what do you think that how the state of the nation is going? Is it good? You know, or tell me what you think about this particular religion or that particular, like the deeper topics. Nothing should be off topic. It's just in how we say it and how we present it. So thank you for that point, Brother Sandy. And to the second point, my mind just went blank because what was the second point? No. It's coming. It's going to come back, Brother Sandy. I'll come back to my own thought because it just went out. I was very much enamored with what you said to begin with. Billy, and then we'll check in with Brother Patrick, and then I'll hopefully remember my second point.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Billy?
Hi, yeah, I'll third that. I'm so glad to be able to talk about this stuff with people. I'm giddy talking about it. So, and I work at a ranch in Montana, so sometimes I try to broach these conversations with my coworkers, and sometimes it goes better than you would expect. And mostly they just give me blank looks. But anyway, I'm glad, yeah, this took a turn I wasn't expecting, but I'm glad that it did. And I was just thinking yesterday about the ranch and how, you know, by your definition of art, the ranch and all the grazing and stuff we do here, I think would qualify as art. And I told my boss, I was like, you know, you created all of these 75,000 acres of like beautiful grass and wildlife and everything. You created this out of light, you know, and just transforming the energy of the environment around you, you know, through photosynthesis and whatever. But, you know, and and another thing that I just thought was like interesting or unexpected is one of the things we do here at the ranch that we take very seriously is our stockmanship and how we handle our animals, and it's very low stress. And there was this one of the most, in my opinion, like revolutionary stockman. His name was Bud Williams, and he sort of started this whole idea of like low stress stockmanship, which kind of fed into natural horsemanship and whatever, which is huge paradigm from how they used to do things. But Bud Williams, like part of me wonders if he was a Mason or something, but he was definitely connected with like spirituality and perception and how he moved animals. And he would always say, you know, like he was in touch with this idea of like thought forms, you know, and it's something I've come to myself just working with animals. Like they can feel your energy, and you can almost like the thought form a physical thing you can like direct at them to move them. And he talks about, you know, if you're looking for sick calves, you'll find sick calves because you'll be looking at them and sort of like a predator, you know. And he would even when he worked in feedlots, if someone had a flat tire or something on the way to work that day, he would say go home, because if they had a bad attitude, that thought energy would, the cattle pick up on it and they get sicker, and there's actual physical like effects from that. So yeah, it's almost like a lot of people think like you have to move cows on that physical plane, but really like you have to you got to kind of catch them on the mental plane and catch their awareness and make them pay attention to you first, instead of just trying to force them and force their physical body. Like it's just moving animals is very much playing with those levels of like the bodies and layers that you're talking about. So to me, all that said, you know, I love surrealism and fine art and all of that, but more and more I just think of like some of these things I do day to day, like moving animals to me really is like a skilled art form, you know, in a way. So anyway, thanks for the good conversation.
Thank you, Billy. And as promised, I remember what I was going to say. So, with the philosophy of life, and it ties into what Billy was saying, because instead of hurting other animals, we are hurting ourselves, our animal nature, our base nature. We're kind of the shepherd and the sheep, if you want to put it that way. And oftentimes when we get into communities like Freemasonry, then it can be someone else assisting us through the process. So, but with the philosophy of life, here's an example of the difference between a thought and a thought form. So if I were to ask you right now, again, rhetorical, and perhaps maybe you want to reflect on this throughout the next month, what is your philosophy of life? Maybe you need to go look it up. Maybe you have it, you just don't know it. Maybe you do know it. Like, write it down. What is your philosophy of life? That's a thought. Now tell me what it looks like and what shape is it in and what is its texture. Put it into something visual. That's a thought form, because then you can really, once you can see it in your mind's eye, then you really understand it. And I'll give you an example. And this is a weird example, so go with me on this, and then we'll stop for some more comments and questions and move on. So many years ago, a brother from another lodge, another state, she flew into Colorado and said, "Hey, look, I have an extra ticket to go see Brian Weiss, who is a what is it called?
Past life regression.
Thank you, past life regression. He does the hypnosis. That's the word I was looking for. Hypnosis. Come with me." And I'd never heard of the guy. And I was like, yeah, it's the brother who wants to hang out, so we'll go. So she and I, we drove up to Fort Collins and we went and saw Brian Weiss. And I expected, because you hear so much, that someone's going to be called up on stage and they'll do something embarrassing and then they'll sit down and that's it. And I was pleasantly surprised, because he ended up doing past life regression on everyone in the entire audience. And he said, "You have to allow me to do it. Like, you can block me from doing it. But I'll do everyone." So I didn't have to go up on stage. And he said, "I'm going to get you warmed up. We're going to take a vice." And he goes, "I want you," he did his process. He puts you underneath and you remember everything. Like, I remember what I was wearing that day, where I'm sitting, all that stuff. And he said, "I want you to think of a vice." And you think of the vice in however way, you think it. So it's a thought. And he's like, and then he started asking questions. What does it look like? What color is it? What shape is it? Does it move? Like he put it into something that was tangible to the sensory organs. And to this day, I have never had a problem with that vice ever again. It was crazy. And it was just the simple question of giving it a form. It was tying my thought to form and allowing me to be control over it. And then he proceeded to do past life regressions, which again is a topic for another day. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is to get that thought to move. Like, what does your philosophy of life look like? What do you believe in? How do you feel like when you feel about this or that? Like, how is that two-dimensional feeling? How do you build it out into a multi-dimensional thought form? I'm going to go to Patrick and check in with him, Brother Benjamin, and then Mitchell. I haven't forgotten you. We're going to go to you last, and then we'll move on. Patrick, anything? Brother Benjamin?
Question from Ram B. How would you define each of the bodies in the diagram? I'm assuming the one that you were presenting.
The 7, yes. So that's definitely a whole nother topic. But they are different. And even now, after my years of study, I still can't necessarily tell you the exact delineation between certain bodies, because it took me forever to figure out the difference between the astral and the ethereal body. Like, I had to sit with it for like 3 years to really figure out the difference. Brother Benjamin, could you put in the chat seven principles of man, or 7 bodies of man by Andy Besant?
7 principles of man.
7 principles of man.
And we sell that on the exchange, so I can put the link in.
Yeah. So 7 principles of man does an incredible job of just defining it. It's not super hard to read. It's not, sometimes when you read theosophical books, it can get a lot of like Eastern language in there and it can be kind of overwhelming. But I found, that the 7 principles of man was very good at just kind of giving a cursory, like what is mental? And I often go back to the Hermeticism to define mental, like what does mental mean? And that's more than just the mind, like the organ of the brain, that's creation from thought. And then you have the physical, which speaks for itself, the astral, which is going to be different than the etheric double and stuff like that. So I know that's not a great explanation, but I can point you to the source, because if you want, maybe in a future seminar, we can talk about the 7 bodies of man and tied into the thought forms. If anyone's interested, we can probably do that as well. Any other question, Brother Benjamin? Hey, Mitchell, we'll unmute you and you can give us your thought or question.
Yeah, thank you, Brother Kumse. I appreciate it. It's a really interesting topic this evening. To my ear, a lot of this sounds very similar to what I would associate with um, something like law of attraction teachings, or like kind of these manifestation sort of folks who have their own little realm of popularity. But at the same time, it also looks to me like you're going to some length to sort of distinguish what you're presenting here with say maybe more sophisticated philosophical background for what you're doing. So I guess my question then is kind of twofold. One, is that a fair reading? Or am I missing something there? And two, if that is an accurate kind of summary of what we're talking about here tonight, could you speak a little bit about what Freemasonry has to offer on this topic that I wouldn't be able to find from a YouTube video about create your own reality or something?
Excellent questions, Mitchell. So first off, yes, it's not the power of attraction, because I'm not saying necessarily that what you put in the egregore is what you're going to get out of it. Though there's some validity to it. Like if you sit there and only think one way, then that one way is going to impact your perspective in life. So, but it's deeper, and it's so hard. It's almost ineffable. It's so hard to communicate, in the sense of your thoughts create you, but you create those thoughts. So it's that circular experience, but it's not yours. It's kind of like the death of the author. Once you have this thought form, and once you put it in that receptacle and you put it up in the egregore, it is now part of other people's thought forms. So it's kind of like a meta thought form. An egregore is like a meta thought form. It's probably the best way. Would you concur, Brother Patrick? Patrick loves thought forms.
Yeah, and I think meta thought form describes it fairly well.
Yeah, it's like a meta thought form.
Or an over thought form.
Yeah, an over thought form, that would work too. But you don't own it anymore. So every time something bad happens and you send out a thought saying, I hope whoever is impacted is okay, like that goes somewhere, even though you will never see the outcome of it, the fruition of it, because maybe it's a stranger on the street something bad happened to. It goes somewhere. It's our thoughts don't just die. True art will always exist. And to the skilled mind, you can create thought forms that will last forever, because it will become a part of that egregore. And that egregore will be part of another egregore, which ultimately becomes the egregore of humanity. And Freemasonry is very, very interested in the destiny of humanity, in that we believe there is a destiny, and it is a grand one. And what it is specifically, I don't know, but it's grand and it's wonderful, but we have to get there. And those thought forms are methods by which to do it. Now, I'm going to answer your question, Mitchell, by going into the second half of our presentation. I'm going to skip over some stuff because I think it's a great segue. So I appreciate that. Let me just move forward. So here, you can find this color chart in Thought Forms by Annie Besant. She had clairvoyancy and believed that these thoughts tied into different emotions. You can spend more time on that. So here is the source. Before we can get to how Freemasonry takes care of those thought forms, here are the source of your thought forms. Emotions. Emotions are probably the easiest because they're illicit. They just come out. Sometimes you have a very visceral reaction to something that you didn't anticipate, or maybe you are overjoyed with something. That just comes out, that's emotions. Your experience. This is why sometimes in our post-truth era, that experience is more credible than truth. Though if I could tap into a little bit in my background, I have a degree in forensic science. The eyewitnesses are the worst type of evidence you could possibly have, because they're not reliable, because there's so much perception in it, and there's so much take on it. My take is different than your take, and there's different ways. Like my eyesight sees a different, or my eyes see a different color. It might be green to me, but blue to you. So experience is tough, because if something that's experiential like that, it's just really local to the person who's having it. It's like an epiphany. It's hard to share it with other people and have them grok the same magnitude and profundity of it. It doesn't quite work. But experiences are super strong. So even though we know that eyewitness testimony is not the most credible, it is still very valuable to juries, because they want someone to have seen something. They want the experience, and they want to use it as evidence. So thought forms can come from experience. Meditation, I would definitely say prayer is a part of meditation, although there are different ways to meditate into prayer. They are both extremely important. Meditation, I think, is probably, prayer and meditation are probably a little bit more distilled methods than maybe experience and emotion. My favorite, music. Music is a great place. I recently saw a short with, forgive me for this pop culture reference, of Johnny Depp, and he was saying that when he's acting, he's listening to music. He's not really even paying attention to what his co-stars are doing. And he's picked music that he feels embodies whatever character he's doing. And I thought that was just a mind of a genius, a talented actor, because when I read books, I'd like to imagine what music would be playing behind the scene that I'm reading in, or even if it's fiction, nonfiction. I do that. What would be the music of these words? Music can definitely, like, what if I were to ask you this, if you're older, what song is indicative of your childhood? That would be an example of music's impact. This is something we'll talk about later, but thought forms and Freemasonry. So to Mitchell's point, how does Freemasonry help with the thought forms? How does it get thoughts to go into forms? So we have a degree system, and it's not just universal co-masonry, it's all of Freemasonry. And it's called a ladder, like, Jacob's ladder, or a ladder you climb up. And you can go, in Masonry, you can only go up, you can't go back down. But when we look at the ladder, we look at the Masonic progression. This helps us control the landscape. And when I use landscape, I'm using it as a metaphor for a canvas. When we paint the picture of our lives, it is on the landscape of our actions. And we need to figure out how to refine that. Again, when I was talking about the different categories of masonry and how universal co-masonry is built on the purification and elevation of consciousness, we are using our degree system to help us do that. Every Freemason starts as an entered apprentice. Doesn't matter what obedience you're in. Everyone starts in the first degree, the entered apprentice. The second degree is the fellow craft. The third degree is master mason. So without going into any specifics on the, like what is in each degree, because that would definitely ruin it for everyone. Freemasonry helps you through various lessons and dramas, legends and myths, helps you gain mastery of yourself. And it's going back to what Amy said about discipline. It takes incredible amounts of discipline. Now, having been brought up in a religious tradition where I had, we prayed, and then in Masonry, I would say meditate, and people could pray if they wanted to. It's not like you had to do a certain way or whatever. Knowing the difference between the two, for me, prayer was very easy, because, it's something I've done since I was practically born, and, it's kind of like a conversation with God, and, it's more informal, which is kind of weird. To me, I found meditation to be way more formal, where I had to sit there and like really focus and really kind of like distill my thoughts down. I have come to understand prayer to be differently now in my old age, but they both require you to control yourself. You have to discipline your body. Now, I think I've mentioned this before, so forgive me if it's a repeat for anyone who's been here with me for the last couple of months. There's this book I read many years ago, and I do not like self-help books. I do not find them enjoyable to read. I don't seek them out, but for some reason, I picked up the book, The Power of Habit, I think it is. think I still have it in my library. I'm not sure. The Power to Habit. And they talk about in the Power to, I think it's the Power to Habit. They talk about the keystone habit. And the keystone habit is just the one thing that if you control, it will permeate the change in the rest of your life. Now, some people think these are big ticket items, like maybe I'm a smoker, or maybe I do something that, I'm a liar or whatever, that if I change this big ticket item, then the rest of my life will shake out clean. And in the Power of Habit, it talks about the research behind it. It isn't so much that you have to change the big thing, it's that you have to change the one important small thing. For a person, that was, for an example, a person was looking at how to change their life and they were extremely overweight. And, they just lacked motivation to lose the weight, and it was hard for them. And instead of going on all these diets and all this stuff, they decided that what they would do on their break is, from work, they had 2 15-minute break periods in a day, that instead of going over and talking to their friend and picking up whatever snack they had, that they would take their friend and go on a walk around the building for 15 minutes, and that they would get a glass of water or something like that. And it changed the whole thing. Like, it ended up giving them the discipline they needed to make the changes down the road. And just controlling that one instance, those 15-minute breaks, made all the difference. Now, how does this relate to Freemasonry? Because you're probably like, this woman is rambling. I'm not. Freemasonry focuses on discipline, and it's in our website. You can look it up, and I'm going to paraphrase that. We seek the maximum amount of physical discipline with the highest level of intellectual freedom, meaning we are all free to believe as we need to believe and as we find ourselves to believe in, but we have the same discipline, and we are asked, our bodies are asked the same thing. So, Brother Sandy and I have sat in lodge for many, many years together, and we sit the same way. She doesn't get something different because she's a different degree than I or whatever. We sit the same way. We have the same rules. Our Masonic language is the same. There's a discipline that goes in it. And that discipline is important because that discipline will, once we have our body figured out, then we can go to the mind. And that gets us into thought forms. So if I'm in lodge and something's going on and I'm thinking, maybe I'm not necessarily thinking exactly about what's going on in front of me, because sometimes, your mind goes to different places, but I'm thinking about Masonry, and I'm thinking about something, maybe it's about a cardinal virtue that came up the other day, like temperance or prudence. And I'm wondering, am I prudent? What does prudence mean? Do I apply that in my life? That's Masonic speak. And the discipline, even though I'm sitting perfectly still, and, I'm focused on Masonry and I'm thinking about cardinal virtues, I'm getting my mind to train itself to, like, how am I going to act upon that? Because thought forms give you the power of action. Thoughts do not. Thoughts just kind of blow away. So Masonry uses the ritual. It uses poetry. Like we actually have ritual books which have certain foot and meter to it, that have poetic language to it. It's very inspiring in places, different for all of us. Some people will find different places more inspirational than others. It uses art to inspire us through our ritual. And each degree, and I'll give you more. So you have the Mark, the Royal Archmason, and the Holy Royal Arch of Jerusalem. These are known as the English Rite. Some people call it the York Rite. You have each one of these degrees are going to be different in the art and the imagery and the music and the scent, and all of that is going to be different. And as Masons, we use ritual and discipline to help us access different parts of ourselves. And you can say 7, bodies of man, or you can look at it slightly different, but that's how we do it, Mitchell, is that we use ritual and the art of the ritual. So again, that's every degree, which here, you have from the 4th through the 14th is called the Lodge of Perfection, which is part of the Scottish, right? And then you have chapter degrees, philosophical degrees, and then administrative degrees. That's ultimately, this is the universal co-Masonic ladder, so the ancient and accepted universal rite. In other Masonic obediences, just to get a little technical, you have to, after Master Mason, you have to go to different organizations to find, maybe you go to the Lodge of Perfection, and then you go over to this over here and do the chapter degrees. And maybe you're more of an English Rite Mason and you want to do those degrees. you kind of go all over. But in Universal Co-Masonry, we start all of the inter-apprentice and we work up the ladder in a very uniform fashion. This is really important, and it goes back to that electron example I gave you, interestingly enough. Imagine again that you're starting at the first degree, and that requires a certain level of consciousness, which that's what the interviews are for. That's what seminars for and MPS is for, is to help create that level of consciousness you need in order to go into that first degree. Some people are closer to that consciousness than others, so it's why it takes different amounts of time for people to join. So you go in at that entered apprentice degree, and you have a certain level of consciousness, and there's certain lessons that are being taught. And it's not like congregational lessons. It's not like someone standing at a pulpit. Not that that's wrong. It's just not the method we use. And telling you like, this is what you should do and how you should do it. It uses symbols. And for those who haven't seen or weren't a part of my seminar on symbolism, you can find it, I believe, in one of our recordings in the past. And it uses symbols. And that's really, really interesting because a symbol is like a thought form packaged up. Like you have to unwrap it and you have to do something with it. And I do talk in that particular seminar about how symbols are not whatever you want them to be. You can feel whatever you want about them, like you like this one more than that one, but they are what they are, and they have inherent meanings. And that's important because you're trying to use your consciousness to access the egregore of that symbol. So wrap your mind around that. You're using your consciousness to interact with the egregore of that symbol. And so if I say, the one I like to use is the 5-pointed star. So if I say 5-pointed stars, anything in the world that over the last forever that has to do with 5-pointed stars is sitting in that receptacle, good and bad, neutral, whatever, is sitting in that egregore. And you have to use your discipline to access it. And then not only just access it, because that's a theoretical Mason, my term. No one else made that one up. That one's mine. But you want to be an applied Mason. So you want to take that theory and then you want to use it. So once I find out everything I can about the 5-pointed star, and that includes the factual as well as the feeling, the emotion of it, then I have to figure out how to use that symbol. And that's my choice to use that for good or for ill. Now, obviously, if you're a Freemason, we're hoping through moral guidance that you will use it for the betterment of not just yourself, but for everyone. So when we look at these degrees each have different symbols to them. They have different stories, even though there's a grand story that goes from the 1st to the 33rd degree. There's a grand story. There's pieces that are within each one that are just specific to that degree. And they require different levels of consciousness, and they inspire different levels of emotion. And the one thing, we were talking about how emotion is one of the sources of thought form. In Freemasonry, we try to become stewards of our emotions. I am a no drama girl. I do not care to be around things that tend to be overly stated, because it messes with emotions, right? Like it's easy to get caught up into things. And as a Mason, we try to control that. Not that we don't have emotion, but that we are the stewards of them, so that it doesn't just run away. Because emotion also clouds experience. Excuse me. Clouds experience. So you may not be experiencing reality as it is, but as your emotions dictate it. And that can be a very hard canvas to paint on when you're trying to really draft the story of your life, paint the story of your life as we go each day. So the entered apprentice has a different, even though the first 3 degrees are in the same ritual, it's called the Blue Lodge or craft masonry, they still have their different stories and their different music and their different sounds. Now, I want to go to the next slide. And I'm sorry, Mitchell, I know you probably were looking for something a little bit more succinct, but this is what you get. So the first 3 degrees are called Blue Masonry. They actually have colors put to them. And according to the idea of thought forms, one would say that this means it's pure. Again, I'm going back to that color chart that I was referring to earlier, that it's pure. We're looking at purity. And again, if you're not a Mason, it's kind of hard to explain it just because you have to go through experience of being initiated. But in the first 3 degrees is Blue Masonry. It doesn't matter what obedience you're in. And that is going to have a certain set of colors. Now, in the tradition that I grew up in religiously, it was a very neutral meeting space. The congregational area was all like in tans and taupes, and occasionally there might be some deep maroon and fake plants. So there was like nothing living about the space. And there's a reason for that, to have it that way. So when I got into masonry and I experienced the colors and the tones, when I say tones, I'm talking about the artistic tone of masonry, it was overwhelming, because I came from a very flat kind of Protestant perspective of, just there's not much to excite the mind. And I got into masonry, and I'm still excited by all the colors and the things that go on in there, in just regards to the aesthetics of it. So when we go through and we look at the thought forms, having the degrees on this ladder, I can tell you that the thought forms, each time that I'm sitting in lodge, I try to put it on the same frequency as the degree I'm in. So if I'm in a blue lodge, if I'm in a third degree meeting, my thoughts are on that same wavelength. I'm trying to add into whatever the egregore of that meeting is, because you have micro egregores and you have macro and you have various levels. So it's very important to me that I think about those things that I'm adding. So when we look at what's above the blue masonry, it's red to blue is a transitional color. And that's going to include the York Rite, or the English Rite, and the Lodge of Perfection. And again, it's we're moving through the different states, and looking at the different rituals that go with it. Your chapter degrees, which is the capstone of that degree, is the 18th degree, which is the rose croix degrees, the rose and the cross. And that's going to be red. And red is pure affection. So it's interesting, because in Freemasonry, it's not that we're trying to be sterile and scrubbed of all experience and anything that is of a texture or form. We're trying to distill it. We're trying to clean it out from any impurities. So we're moving from a pure religious feeling up to pure affection. So we're elevating that consciousness. Now it's interesting, because pure religious feeling, a lot of people are like, masonry is not a religion. It is a mystery religion. So it is a religion, but it's a mystery religion. And that is a totally different experience than perhaps the exoteric religious schools that people come from. So that pure religious feeling, that ecstasy that people feel, blue masonry is trying to harness that and to get your thought forms to resonate with that. The red masonry, again, which is the chapter masonry, the 15th through the 18th, possibly could be pure affection. So pure affection. And I think that the rose and cross. Now, this isn't giving anything away about the degrees, but the rose and cross has a very modern, and when I say modern, a 2,000-year-old modern connotation of sacrifice and purity. And so pure affection, what does that elicit? So when I'm in those meetings, like I try to train my thoughts to be on that same level. And it's difficult, because pure anything is difficult. There has been times where I've been in a meeting, one degree in particular, where I struggled with something that I was like, I don't like the way that feels. It's not, I don't understand it as well as I think I should. And, I had to really sit with it. And my resonance was not on the same level. My thought form was not on the same level. And it took a lot of time for me to really process that, to raise myself up, to really understand how my thought forms were they were destructive rather. And so again, black masonry isn't what you think. A lot of people think black is malice. It's not, it's hard to explain. When we look at the 30th, the 31st, 32nd degrees, this is having to deal with courts and justice. It's having to deal with regaining that which was lost. And so when we look at those thought forms, they're going to have a totally different feeling and texture and boundary than the chapter degrees and the pure religious feelings of the blue masonry. And then white masonry is going to be that devotion, and that's administrative. Again, if I ask a brother, whatever degree they have, if I say, tell me what you think the mark degree looks like, and describe the thought form, that is ultimately, it will start to be chaotic. And this is a meditation practice. It will start to be chaotic. It will start out to be rough and hard to kind of grasp. But through enough questioning and enough practice and discipline, that thought starts to take form. And you get that definiteness that was talked about earlier. So Mitchell, that is how we work on the thought forms. Notice there was no like attraction, like I wasn't asking for anything. Though there is reward that comes back, because that is how life works, and you can't give without receiving, even if you try. But ultimately, it's all about moving forward. It's about getting our thoughts to mean something. And in order for it to mean something, it has to start to take form. So the art of Freemasonry, when we look at that, the art of Freemasonry is the art of discipline in creating thought forms and having those thought forms be useful. I often think back to that conversation on Wagner, and how Wagner, would I have ever been invited back, if I was ever invited at all, to his dinner table, to his party? Would I have had anything meaningful to say? And if I can't say yes, then I have some work to do, because our time is very limited here on earth. Whether we believe in one life or multiple, it does not matter. It is still limited. And the one thing that is certain is that we are here now. How do we use that time? How do we condition ourselves? Because ultimately there's this picture. This is the alchemical component. I was going to talk about that, but it's kind of a little bit off of what we're talking about. But here is some renditions of thought forms of that people have had over the time. And so you can look at it, the seeing of music. Each one of these is music's being played. And this is what's being, someone pictured as their thought form in egregore. So my question for you, and this is a long-term assignment, and for those who know me, they know I love to give homework, is I want you to go and think about, and we'll still Sandy's comment, philosophy of life. What do you believe in? And I want you to think about it, and I want you to draw its thought form. Like, I want you to really sit down with it and draw it out. And it doesn't have to be beautiful. You don't have to show it to anyone. And then in some time from now, 6 months or a year, I want you to go back and ask yourself the same question and draw your thought form out. And I wonder if they would be the same. I probably doubt that it would be, but the question is, why did it change? I think it is more, it's more sadder is the word. It is sadder to have a thought form that never changes than a one that is constantly changing. I think ultimately a lot of people, we hear it a lot in politics, like they are constantly flip-flopping. The mind needs to grow, and we need to change in our thoughts. And so if we have a hard time kind of measuring where our thoughts are, perhaps through art, we will find a way to measure our change. In Masonry, in Universal Co-Masonry, we have essays that we write on different topics. And I keep all the essays that I write, and I was looking back at one of them that I wrote some years ago, and it's like, man, my thoughts have changed a lot on that. If I were to write that essay again, I would definitely have gone a different way, and that's a good thing. And maybe it's good in the sense that I realized that I moved off the beaten path, or it's good in the sense that I found the beaten path, or whatever direction that it goes. But thought forms is the art of Freemasonry. We are trying our very best to impose impact. And what I mean by imposing it is that, right now, a lot of people feel that the world is very much at war with itself. My job as a Freemason is not to feed into that egregore and say, yep, we're at war with each other. I can be realistic and say, yeah, we got some work to do to get some peace going on, but I don't have to constantly be feeding into that. I mean, I don't have to live in that chronic, everything's bad, everything's horrible. Because I remember, and this is anecdotal, but I remember an instance where I was having this thought where I was like, man, this was many years ago. I was like, man, things are really bad. And I was like starting to believe this particular thought I had. It was the form that was taking over me. I was being consumed by my own thoughts. And a really good friend of mine, I met her for lunch, and she was like, the world is full of good people. Like, there's so many wonderful people. And it just pulled me out of this negative space that I had put myself in. And that's what ultimately Freemasonry is trying to do. It is trying to add to the positive the positive aspects of these egregores through ritual, through ceremony, to help impose an impact that is for the betterment of humanity. Freemasonry isn't about the self. It isn't about serving, like, what can I get out of it? That's probably one of the biggest questions I get when I work with inquirers. I'm sure Brother Rosario has the same thing. But that's not really the right question. It's really, how can I help humanity? I see humanity having this path. How do I help it get there? And my idea and your idea may be different, but we're still feeding into the thought form, that egregore of how is humanity better. We're painting the future that has not yet been written of what we want humanity to do. And we need guidance. This is the last part before we close out. Excuse me. Freemasonry has a North Star. Humanity needs a North Star, and I use that metaphorically. To think that we are the highest authority in all things is a grave mistake by many, many individuals. We need something to help guide us to our future. If we don't have an active say in what that is, I choose that North Star versus that star over there, then something else will take its place. We have no choice but to be guided, but we do have a choice by what is guiding us. And so Freemasonry is a moral system. It's deeply moralistic. And that's why it is such a tragedy when an individual goes against that moral path and uses it for ill, because it is so deeply moralistic. Because to add to, I think it was Amy said about discipline and power and strength, but you also need a third aspect. You need morality. You need a North Star. You need something that's higher and greater. Many people have chosen a secular direction, and I would argue that's not a North Star. That's not looking up. That's not going into imagination and possibility. That's not going into the high ideals of Plato that he talked about, that realm. Then the collective unconsciousness. You can use all these different ideas. They all kind of mean the same in a way. When we want to look up. And when in Masonry, what we're trying to do is we're trying to use that North Star, that guidance, the great architects, the divine spark, the divine source, again, whatever word you want to use. We want to follow it. And we want to make sure that the thought forms that we're creating are in line with that. And we need the guidance of a system to do that. All humans need a system. It's best to choose one knowingly which one you're using, and that it's going to help you become the controller of your own destiny. And that is the art of Freemasonry. It is a technique. The ritual is its technique. It uses myth and legend. It uses sound and smells and colors, and it uses poetry, and it uses all sorts of, even acting. It uses all these things to help us train ourselves to find that path of preferment, that path that is, it's beaten down, but not because the masses walked on it. It's beaten down because it's a hard path to walk, and those who have walked it carry a heavy burden. And so that's the path that we're trying to get to. And controlling our thoughts and using them to create thought forms is the art of every Freemason. And our master is the ritual. The master artist that teaches us as the apprentice is the ritual. There is nothing higher than that. Not a person, but an idea. So I hope that as we come to the conclusion of the art of Freemasonry, that you can take something that we talked about this evening and start to use the discipline in your life to help you create thoughts that are meaningful, that are productive. And you can have a productive thought form. And I want to add this in, if there's a negative, an egregore that's a lot of negativity in it, you can change it. You can add the opposite. So if there's something that you don't like that is, super popular or super present, you can try to fight it as well using thought forms that are good. It does help. So this is what I tell my daughter. You are your own solution. You are the way to make things work and make them work well. We just need to have the discipline which Freemasonry gives us. It gives us hierarchy. It gives us discipline. It gives us parameters in which we need to learn and understand how to conduct ourselves. So I want to thank everyone for coming out to the Masonic seminar this evening and enjoying. I've enjoyed your conversation and your questions as well as your company. Next month starts a new year. As always, I like to shake things up, so you'll probably see something different than what's online on our website. As I like to keep things new and wonderful. If you have a topic you'd like to discuss, feel free to email it to me and I'll see if I can put it in. Otherwise, I hope you will join us again in January. I hope you're having a wonderful holiday season, no matter where you're coming from. And I look forward to seeing you at our next seminar. Have a wonderful evening.
Yes.